This program raises questions. This program is for people who find it hard to trust God. The best answers are wrapped in flesh and blood. My friends, people who are enduring real tragedies every single day. Quadriplegia, muscular dystrophy, stroke, bankruptcy, loneliness, singleness. We're going to talk to those very people who have touched my life.
Going through a very painful divorce and suddenly being alone with Max. He was 18 months old.
When you first hear that your children are going to have to raise a child with disabilities, you're going to be heartsick.
The challenge with autism is the individuals seem quite removed.
Max takes over. For a controlled person like me, that's tough.
We have had some very hard times.
Max put to the test what I preach.
People look at my granddaughter. All they see is the tragedy.
We didn't know at the beginning, would she ever talk, would she ever walk?
She's very dependent on other people for everything.
That I have a father who's known the world around for trying to persuade people of the sovereignty of God.
Insofar he's made that decision to let it happen, he has ordained that it be so.
Now God says, here's this challenge. Do you really believe that this is from my hand?
In this episode, we will visit with two of the titans of Christian theology, Chuck Colson and R.C. Sproul. They've helped shape the biblical worldview that is carrying the Christian church through this modern era. They point others to the reliability of and practical help found in God's Word. But what happens when disability hits home? When God hands you a challenge that tests your convictions in practical, heart-wrenching, and not academic ways? Well, first let's visit with my friend and mentor, Chuck Colson, who, during the Nixon administration, served as top advisor to the president, during which he became entwined, then convicted, in the Watergate scandal. After serving time in prison and experiencing a conversion to Christ, Chuck Colson began Prison Fellowship, a ministry not only serving those incarcerated, but advancing prison reform. Chuck, however, is also deeply dedicated to his family, which brings us to the story in our episode. So, let's journey to Massachusetts, where we will join his daughter, Emily Colson Bain, and her teenage son, Max.
I was a graphic designer.
Take it upstairs, take it upstairs, take it upstairs. Hey, wait, stop the picture. My fire engine.
So everything he's worried about.
He walks into a room.
Upstairs. Okay.
It's like dropping, our daughter Emily says, like dropping a spoon into the blender.
Autism can affect every part of an individual. So Max has taken years to be able to make his fingers move to write. The speech is difficult, not just to retrieve the words, but then to actually speak the words.
We have to mix them up.
It's communication, it's processing information. It is, for many of them, it's anxiety. For Max, anxiety has been a huge problem for him. Going through a very painful divorce and suddenly being alone with Max. He was 18 months old and clearly not developing. It was a very, very painful time. The autism became very difficult when he was about 8 years old. Lots of tantrums, lots of very difficult behavior. It's very hard when families are unable to simply go to the grocery store. You run out of milk and you just need something so simple and you can't do it. We have had some very hard times.
When you first hear that your children are going to have to raise a child with disabilities, with all the burdens that go with it, with all the expense that goes with it, all the problems, you're going to be heartsick as a parent to see your child in that situation. You're going to really grieve for him or her. You're going to be worried about them. But as soon as you realized the problems you were dealing with, then it became a question, oh, how do we handle this?
When Max was young, my dad worked, I think, very hard to try to teach Max. My dad is a great teacher. I think it was frustrating for him because it didn't always go the way that he thought it would go. And Max wasn't always interested in learning about what Grandpa was interested in. When Max was 6, my dad ended up with the flu on one of our visits. And he was on the couch watching Max and I for almost a week. And it's pretty unusual for my dad not to be moving and getting phone calls and having an idea and going and writing it down. And every time my dad would get up and get a glass of water or do anything in another room, Max would jump up and sit right down in his grandfather's spot and pretend he had the flu. I think at that point, he realized that he had to get where Max was and meet Max where he was. And it changed everything.
I've always been the type A person, always busy, always on some crusade to save the world. You have someone like Max come into the family and everything else stops because Max takes over.
Yeah, but you need the music to dance to, buddy.
For a controlled person like me, that's tough.
What happened, Happy?
First thing I realized is that Max put to the test what I preach. If I preach that all human beings are created in the image of God, then I gotta live it.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Max is the only one that will get my dad to spend a week playing. I mean, really playing.
He's the only one that can keep me out of my office. My wife Patty tries, but usually without success. Max keeps me out of the office, and when he's in town, he's my agenda. I love it.
He gets my dad to play mini golf.
I'm kind of an introvert. I like quiet time. I don't have any quiet time when Max is around.
He gets in the pool, and, you know, Max will get his grandfather to act like a sea monster and make funny noises. And nobody can do that to my dad. And it's so wonderful. I think in many ways the situation has brought our whole family closer. They know that I've needed help in a lot of ways, and it's a lot of families that don't jump in.
It's never easy. You know, I've talked about the blessing it is to have Max and the blessing he is to us and the blessing he is to his mother. But that doesn't mean it's an easy deal. It's hard work. If you were alone and had no help, it would be overwhelming.
In my hardest times, my dad has been at the other end of the phone, no matter what he was doing. Whenever I would dial that number, he would say, "I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing a thing, Emily." And he would spend whatever time I needed on the other end of that phone. And that's a remarkable thing.
This strong family bond of Christian love between Chuck, Emily, and Max bears fruit in so many ways. As Chuck and his wife Patty support Emily, Emily is thereby strengthened to give love, support, and teaching to Max. And of course, that fun-loving teenager can't help but give back to his mom and his grandparents. I mean, Max has taught them so many invaluable lessons in areas of service, patience, long-suffering, commitment. But those lessons fade in comparison to what Max has taught them about joy.
Emily's amazing. Patty and I marvel at the way that she takes everything in stride, the way she coaxes Max, the way she teaches him.
He can remember everything. And so he can remember. Yes, Max?
Will you have a soda party?
I'm going to come in just a minute. We'll have a soda party.
And what's at the soda party?
What kind of soda are you going to have?
All Pepsi. Oh. And what's at the party?
You know, part of the challenge with autism is often the individuals seem quite removed. Max remembers everything, so I can't tell you that he really has been removed. It is just that they appear that way. And I found early on if I could get him giggling and laughing, he was so completely connected to me and connected to the situation. So we have really built on that premise that we are going to laugh as much as we can. I have friends that call him the joy boy.
Well, anybody who knows anything about autistic children know that they have certain obsessions. Max has an obsession with car seats. I had an Audi with leather seats, which Max just loved. So then when the car was ready to be junked, he wanted more than anything else to have those car seats. So his uncle got the seats out of the car and bolted it onto a wooden base, and Max just loves it. He also has a seat out of a Volvo because he's fascinated by Volvos. So you walk into Emily's living room and you see a couch and a love seat and a chair, but you also see 2 car seats. That's home base for Max.
We started drawing about 10 years ago. Everything that happens that he worries about, he talks to me about, and I draw whatever he's saying. As an artist, this was a really logical outlet and answer to prayer. The amazing thing was his language just exploded. All of a sudden his language was concrete, and things that he worries about were now on paper and they were done. This helped him alleviate a tremendous amount of anxiety. I think we have about 1,200 drawings.
Her love is so deep, and she realizes that God's love for her is the same love she has for her child. And so you feel it in her house.
Grandma and Grandpa! Come in. Grandma and Grandpa!
The real test of a Christian is this: no greater love has any man than he will lay his life down for his brother. And when you see someone lay their life down for someone else, which is what Emily is doing with Max, that's the gospel being lived out before your eyes. It's been a real blessing in our family.
God's doing a profound work in this family, in Chuck's, Emily's lives, but also in a way no one expected, because God is doing something extraordinary in Max's life.
When Max was at a worship service, Patty and I were in the worship hall, and Emily and Max were sitting in the reception room. They saw a baptism taking place in the baptistry, and Max turned to his mother and said, "I want to be baptized like that in Grandpa's pool." We all sat down with Max and asked him all these questions about Jesus, and he fully understood it. Came to realize that if the pastor got in the pool, Max wouldn't get in the pool. So I called the pastor and he ordained me for a day. When I baptized him in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and put him down and came up, he was radiant.
I could wallpaper a room with the reports of what he couldn't do. And I looked at him being baptized and I thought, but you know what? He can do the thing that is more important than tying your shoes. And can you write yet? He gave his life to Christ and he knew what he was doing.
I don't suppose there's anybody ever been baptized where it was more meaningful to that person than it was with Max. He has an unusual quality of being able to share his love with other people, and he blesses us all, blesses me especially.
He has some gifts that are so much more wonderful to be around, and give so much more to other people than can he write well, can he write neatly. Oh, he can love perfectly, and I would choose that any day.
If you look at something in the way it affects you first, you can be very worried, very concerned. If you see how things are going to affect God, and with what you're doing, how that becomes a blessing to other people, that changes your nature completely. We've learned to appreciate Max and see God's handiwork in his life in ways that you wouldn't see it in most people's lives.
When God allowed autism in that family, it wasn't a fluke of fate or a divine flip of the coin. I think you can see how even that tragedy, as some would call it, is bearing so much fruit in not just their lives, but in all those who come in contact with Max. But what if the disability in God's plan doesn't seem to include a happy ending? I have another friend, Dr. R.C. Sproul, who, like Chuck Colson, is a titan of the Christian faith and one of the most respected leaders in Christendom. Dr. Sproul is first and foremost a theologian. His life goal is to study and make known the character of God. He's the author of many books, and whether it's in a small classroom setting or in large conferences, R.C. loves to teach on the doctrines of the Christian faith. I can say he's had a huge impact on my own journey of faith with my disability. However, even for giants of the faith, sometimes God's plan does not seem to include a happy ending. Because, like Chuck Colson, R.C. Sproul is the grandparent of a child with a severe disability. Believe me, his confidence in the sovereignty of God was put to the test when his grandchild was born too. And how he and his family responded is quite a story.
I have a father who's known the world around for trying to persuade people of the sovereignty of God. And all his convictions in that vein, he poured into me all my life.
And I like to explain it like this, that anything that happens in this world, God knows. And he knows before it happens. And he has the power to stop it. And insofar he's made that decision to let it happen, he has ordained that it be so.
Now God says, here's this challenge. Do you really believe that this is from my hand?
Well, when R.C. Jr. and his wife Denise had Shannon, their little girl, she was born with less encephali, which means flat brain, as the brain normally has these ridges and convolutions in it. Hers was missing all of those, and that, of course, is a severe impairment.
She can't speak. She isn't potty trained. You know, she has to be fed. And then also the medication to keep her from having the seizures, plus the seizures when they overcome the medication, they all make her a little unsteady on her feet as well.
She usually has a real regular menu. Breakfast is almost always oatmeal and yogurt. Lunch or supper she'll have pasta and some baby food, and then the other meal is usually completely baby food. There are physically certain things that are difficult. Lifting her for me now is difficult, but there are times when I need to do that with getting her into bed or into the van or in the tub. And as much as we do try to do together as a family, there are limitations on what she is able to do. And so we can't necessarily take her.
She has to be tended to, she has to be watched. Shannon is our third oldest child. So since then, we have had 4 children that have started out smaller than her, who grow bigger than her, and in a manner of speaking, get older than her. But the greatest hardship for me is every day knowing that it's extremely likely that Shannon will go on to her reward before we will.
I, of course, was deeply concerned as a grandfather and as a father for how my son and his wife were going to be able to handle this very difficult situation.
When Shannon was diagnosed, of course my parents they love me and they love Shannon, and they're very concerned about it, and they were trying to probe past my tendency toward a sort of stoic response. And they, very earnestly, R.C., how are you doing? And I said to them, I said, I really believe that God has been preparing me for this all my life.
Both R.C. and Denise have been extremely devoted disciples of Christ for many, many, many years. My son said, we see this as a profound honor that the Lord, in His goodness and in His grace, would give to us the responsibility of the care of this child.
'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace. You will, in all sincerity, not just because you're supposed to, but you will, in all sincerity, love all your children the same. but it is the frailness and the weakness that elicits the compassion for these special children.
Shannon is not just my son and daughter-in-law's daughter. Shannon's my granddaughter and my wife's granddaughter. And we have a deep, deep commitment to them.
We have a wonderful extended family that has, been supportive and loving towards all of our children. Her grandparents have just been very giving with their time and concern and affection.
And the idea of extended family is kind of like a dinosaur that no longer fits in our culture. However, the family is not something that was invented by the culture. This is something that is given by God.
It's clear that both R.C. and his son believe that God is in absolute control, that he sovereignly gave Shannon to the family. But to them, it's not a dry academic doctrine. The extent of God's control is not merely a subject for classroom debate, and Shannon, for that matter, is not an audiovisual aid of some object lesson. No, rather, for the Sproul family, the sovereignty of God is much more compassionate than that. It's a bridge to understanding something tender and something wonderful about God.
That dealing with a child with special needs is not a punishment. Not because God loves me. It's not a punishment because it's not hard. Because she's a joy, she's a gift, she's a blessing.
God's sovereignty doesn't admit to degrees. We don't talk about God's being 80% eternal, or 80% immutable, or 80% omnipotent. If he were 80% omnipotent, he wouldn't be omnipotent, or 80% omniscient. Now, God is 100% sovereign, even over these tragic things. How else could he make the promise to us? All things work together for good by those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. How can that be true if God's not sovereign over all things? My hope and my confidence is in a God who is sovereign and who cares and who is determined to bring good out of evil and to work all these things together for good.
She is a charge for not just my wife and I, but to the children as well. They have obligations and responsibilities toward her, but even they don't resent this. It's not like they're upset because they'd rather be playing video games or something when they have to feed her. They're very giving, very loving, and caring toward her.
The love that exudes within that family for this child is a remarkable testimony to God.
It is a challenge, but it's not a punitive, dealing from God's hand where he's trying to punish us. It's been a blessing. God, he doesn't make mistakes. He created Shannon just as he created me and you and my husband, and he intended for her life to be as it is, and it was meant to be a blessing to her and to us.
You cannot, in the final analysis, have a synthesis between this world and the things of God. There is an antithesis between naturalism and Christianity, between those who hold to a divinely founded sanctity of human life and those who see life simply as a cosmic accident where human beings have emerged fortuitously from the slime. I know that humanists want to assign human dignity to these biological accidents, but they are living on borrowed capital. As Schaeffer said, they're like people with both feet planted in thin air. They're on a roller coaster without brakes. Let's face it, let's be honest. If I'm a mistake, if I come from the slime and I'm going to the slime, what difference does it make if I'm a germ, whether black germs or white germs sit on the back of the bus? The idea of human dignity apart from God is simply a delusion.
As far back as I can remember, I have been involved in the whole pro-life issue. This has always mattered a great, great deal to me. But when Shannon was diagnosed, this issue about which I was very passionate suddenly became exceedingly personal. Now we're talking about people who are saying about my child, she shouldn't be here.
When people look at my granddaughter, they look with a jaundiced eye. There's a kind of myopia there. All they see is the tragedy. And that's why people from this world will get angry, in fact, say this child should have been aborted. There's no reason why this child was ever brought into the world. They don't see the image of God in Shannon, but my son sees it, and my daughter-in-law sees it, and the brothers and sisters see it, and I can see it.
There is no qualification to the biblical language that says children are a blessing. It doesn't say healthy children are a blessing. It says children are a blessing.
I'm sure Shannon has many purposes and the reasons God has placed her here. One of them is just bringing joy to our everyday lives. She brings warmth and love, unconditional love.
This is a child made in the image of God. She's a child of God.
We've just enjoyed a rare and privileged look into the personal lives of two of the most respected leaders in the Christian faith today. And as much as they have written and spoken about God's sovereignty over suffering and the sanctity of life, theirs is not an academic perspective. Their grandchildren have given Chuck Colson and R.C. Sproul a very personal perspective on timeless doctrines. Disability cannot shake their faith because that faith is grounded in Jesus Christ, a personal God who endured far more suffering than they ever will. He conforms everything to His will, even autism and brain disorders. And that is something to carry you and your family through too, should you be the parent or a grandparent of a child like Max or Shannon.